Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I've got a bit of a different video planned today because my editor Christian was kind enough to send me a video over from Sara Dietschy's channel saying that I should react to it. It's about home ownership and specifically a condo that she recently purchased, talking about some of the issues and problems that have come up or may come up. So I thought it'd be interesting to do a reaction to that as a real estate investor myself, someone who owns a condo, a townhome, both of those in Chicago, and then a single family home out in Indianapolis, Indiana. I've had my share of real estate headaches, and I'm also a real estate attorney, so I'm dealing with headaches, or more really trying to prevent future headaches, at least on the legal side, with my everyday job.
So I want to do like a condo update because, hey, we've done a few things. Look, we now have chairs. You know, the first video was after we had just moved and it was chaotic. It's still chaotic. We're going to talk about that today.
You know, I'm still going through a bit of that myself right now. I bought this place that I'm currently filming from a few months ago, but it still feels like we're unpacking because really we kind of are. We're putting together different furniture items, new stuff. You never really know what you need until you settle down in the place. And then you end up making a bunch of trips to Home Depot, a bunch of trips to pick up furniture or ordering furniture online. It's just, you never really finish settling in once you buy a place.
This building, right? It's a super unique layout and vibe. One of the very few lofty vibes you can get where we live in the DFW area.
This is a really nice looking condo. Really like that full panel window kind of design. You get a lot of natural light, it looks like, and a really nice view of the skyline, so that's pretty cool. And even with endless construction, which isn't really a bad thing for the long term if things are being built up next to this condo, and as long as those views aren't blocked, this should hold its value pretty well, I would imagine.
It's October 2021, and I think the biggest part about this time period is the labor shortage, the supply shortages. I'm sure you hear it on the news all of the time. Like, it's a real thing. So we've had to do a lot of hurry up and waiting, but with that means that I am at my computer a lot, just changing the plans for everything, and they've changed since the last time we talked. These are the plans that we originally were going to go with, and now we're actually going with these other plans, except I changed the design of the custom shelves. That was a lot of fun, and the reason for this change is, one, it's just more affordable, and two, it's just easier to find the materials.
I think I like the second version a bit better, at least when we're talking about kind of broader market sort of taste. That's probably gonna be a little bit better bang for your buck, but when we're talking about a custom kitchen, custom cabinetry, that's gonna get pretty expensive anyway. So I don't know what kind of ROI she's looking at on this rehab, but I do like the style she's picking. It definitely looks clean. The
most important lesson that I've learned was gonna hit home for some of you guys. Stick with me. Just because you enjoy home renovation shows, whether on TV or YouTube, doesn't mean that you're gonna be good at home renovating. Doesn't mean that you're gonna have the time or money or skills to do said renovations.
So home renovations are really on a spectrum. You have time and money. Those are the two things that you can spend to get through renovation. Sometimes it's really both if you're trying to get the exact sort of design and layout that you actually want. The way I look at it is you could put a lot of time towards fixing up the property, and as Sarah's saying, it's definitely not as they show it on HGTV and all those great flipping shows. And sure, those are great and they make it look really easy and simple, but these things take a lot of time when it comes to permitting, expenses, things you run into, new issues. When you rip open walls, you see, hey, that's a problem that we probably should address now. Add on a few thousand or many more hours, depending on what you're doing with the projects. But the point is, you could either spend a lot of your own time and labor towards the job, or you can spend a lot of money hiring other people's labor. And in this market where there's a bit of a labor shortage, especially in hotter areas, I'm sure like the Dallas area that Sarah's in, it's gonna be pretty tough to find quality labor at an affordable price. So you're probably gonna be dishing out quite a bit more money to get exactly what you want. That's why when you buy a property that you think is gonna need some work, you better be conservative in your estimates because you never know what that rehab is really gonna throw at you.
I learned the hard way that I do not have either the time or skills to do things by myself. But yeah, that middle ground of not just like hiring contractors, but also like keeping in touch with them and picking out materials and doing all of this middle ground work that isn't as sexy and it's not as fun. And so one practical thing that I would recommend that I didn't do, because it cost, us a lot of money just to move to Texas because our condo was flooded with the winter storm. We couldn't move in for a month. We're spending all this money on hotels. So I was like, hey, I'm gonna play the role of the project manager, okay? If I could rewind time, I would maybe spend the time that I'm already spending working, maybe do one more job to afford someone who can handle everything.
Yeah, I would definitely agree here, especially if you're not a very handy person or you've never done something like this before. You should be prepared to hire something like a general contractor who could be that project manager and would hire out subcontractors from there. I mean, you can be pretty flexible in how you do this, and it depends on the size of your rehab, but especially when you're dealing with something like a condo association or an HOA that might have pretty restrictive rules and procedures, you're going to want to make sure that you have someone who can really stay on top of those rules and procedures so you don't violate things and you end up having to pay fines or having to redo work because you violated some rule. Ideally, hiring a GC who's done work in that building and those who understand the laws and regulations in the neighborhood or town that it's in, that's going to be very important and pretty valuable. And ideally, that's going to make sure you're going to have a better job when it's all done, and it's going to take some work off your plate in the meantime, even if it means you're going to have to fork over even quite a bit more cash. Okay, I gotta admit that those appliances do look pretty awesome. I'm guessing they ran a pretty penny, but when it comes to an investment perspective here, that's kind of the perspective I'm taking when I'm buying any of my primary residences, at least for the foreseeable future. This is going to be a rental at some point. I don't think that's what Sara plans on doing with this condo. It's probably going to be for her own use for a very long time. But I always like to have the optionality of knowing that if I needed to move out of this place or wanted to move out of this place, I wouldn't have to sell it because I could rent it out at a profit or at least break even, so I could keep building equity in the property, and so I could keep building wealth with real estate rather than having to go through transaction costs and all the negative things associated with selling a property, plus all the stress. When you're getting into embellishments like these appliances, for example, it's probably not going to add as much rental value as you might think. Of course, it depends on your specific market. If this is a luxury condo and in the luxury rental market, then perhaps it could be warranted, but this is another thing that you're going to have to maintain potentially. Maybe her partnership with Best Buy would make that a bit easier, but for those of us who do not have partnerships with Best Buy, you got to keep in mind that the higher end these appliances are, the more expensive they are to repair. This doesn't mean that you should skimp out and only use super cheap appliances, because you might have to replace those even more often, and ultimately it is part of the income producing asset that is real estate. But again, that's when you're using an investment lens. I don't think that's what Sara's doing here, but I think that is helpful when you're going into a first-time home ownership situation. But ultimately, it does come down to your personal goals.
And I feel like it's appropriate to end this video with something that was heavily requested after I briefly mentioned it in the first video, and that's talking about HOA drama.
Now, I will say, as someone who owns a condo in a small building in Chicago that's only got 8 units in it, I also have experience working in a very large condo development because I actually did that as my first job out of school. I worked in condo management. And this specifically was for around a 300-unit condo complex with multiple different types of buildings in them. And I will say, as a general rule, the more units in a condo development, or really just any neighborhood in a homeowners association, the more units there are, the more drama there is. And typically the more rules and regulations you got to worry about as well.
So I guess the last bit of advice, if you can purchase your first home without an HOA, because I know a lot of single family homes, they have these like perfect neighborhoods, and so sometimes there are HOAs. I would avoid them if you can.
I'm going to push back a little bit here and say that you can definitely have success with a property that is within an HOA. It's not as though every single HOA is terrible, but like I was saying before, the bigger the HOA, the more amount of units under it, the more amount of units and people in its jurisdiction as the mini government that it is, typically the worse experience it's probably going to be, because they have more power and responsibilities, and they may abuse certain things or mismanage, more likely, certain things, and it can be very annoying dealing with that. Whereas with smaller buildings, you might run into the same problems, but it's less likely just simply because there are less people to deal with, and typically you can just kind of go neighbor to neighbor and deal with any issues that way. In many cases, not all, of course, it definitely depends on the condo itself, but I think you can have a lot more success with smaller condo buildings than you might have with larger condo developments where there's tons of people within an HOA, and that goes for single family neighborhoods too. If you're gonna buy a property in an HOA, definitely be sure to read the rules and regulations and the declaration and bylaws before you buy that property, because they are going to be binding on you, the new owner. So be sure that you know what you're getting into. Many times condos and HOAs will totally prevent rentals or certain types of rentals. They'll have pet restrictions, and basically any restriction you can think of under the sun might be in there. So you want to make sure you know what you're getting into. And if it's something that's too restrictive, maybe you want to have it as a rental long-term, but it specifically says you can't have a rental, then you're probably going to steer clear of that property. So be sure you actually do your due diligence. That counts. And that means looking at those rules before you buy.
So we learned that this building has been completely mismanaged for the past 6 years. Basically, the funds from all of the HOA fees and assessments and all that have been royally mismanaged because they basically, the management company, like commingled it with other businesses. So even electricity numbers, just every single number was not accurate. So even our electricity bill every month was kind of just like a consistent number. They would put it into a spreadsheet. They weren't checking meters. So our electricity is actually much more expensive than we thought.
Pretty egregious, and it sounds like this is really on the management company that the condo association ended up hiring. They did a terrible job because as an owner in a homeowners association, especially within the condo building, you are also a part owner in all the common areas. So you have to maintain those or your proportionate share of them. And that's what the budget is for. You're paying your dues every single month. In this case, it sounds like it paid for utilities as well, which is interesting since I'm not really sure how old this building is, but that seems a little bit odd if it is a newer building where you'd expect things to be separately metered, but I guess in this case it wasn't. Or maybe that was specifically for the common areas, I'm not too sure. But anyways, the HOA dues are supposed to go towards those things: common area expenditures, maintenance, and general capital expenditures. And you're building up a reserve fund, or at least should be as a condo association, so that when the big expenses do arise, you're ready to take care of them. And that's not to mention paying for the association's insurance policy, as well as the property taxes on the common areas and anything else that the association might have to pay for. So that's another thing to look at before you buy a property. In addition to the rules and regulations, declaration, bylaws, take a look at the budget as well. See what amount of reserves the condo association has. You should have the opportunity to see that before you buy the property. And if you can't, well, that's a huge red flag, because you should be able to see the budget of the property before you buy it, see what's going on, see what amount of money they have, and you could ideally have some understanding if there's been some mismanagement, or if you might be on the hook for a special assessment, which is bigger than your normal monthly dues, because the association has to make up that balance to pay for whatever expense it is. So that can always happen. That's always a risk with HOAs. They might be able to throw a special assessment on you, which is like a one-time fee, or sometimes it's stretched over many months to make up for some sort of loss that they weren't prepared for.
Even though I just so carefully looked at everything, I guess I didn't look careful enough. So turns out that, with HOAs and buildings, you should have a reserve amount of money that you have to the side in case an emergency comes up, like the winter storm that wreaked havoc on our building. So apparently there was no reserve of money, not at all. And then when I learned of this and I looked back at our closing disclosures, in tiny, 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 tiny print, the number was like $600,000 or something. And it said, as of 2016.
Okay, I'm kind of surprised that that was allowed to fly. I don't know if she had an attorney on the deal, but that seems pretty egregious that they wouldn't even give you last year's numbers or something much closer to the actual time period that you're buying in. That's pretty outrageous.
So apparently they had that money in 2016, but after that, no, not at all. There's so many details, right? Okay, so winter storm happens, things flood, and apparently the reason why all of the elevators were broken and all of the pipes burst and all this is because it was just mismanaged before. Apparently there was something on the heaters that didn't do, and because of this, because it was jerry-rigged and not fixed properly. So in all these meetings that we're going to, we're learning that all of this stuff could have been avoided if it was just managed properly, right? Ugh, jab to the heart, right? And this is one of those things that you can't really get a perfect gauge on it before you move in, because that closing period is so fast and you're worried about inspections of your unit and all of this stuff, not necessarily a building. You just assume that things are running normally. And the tensions, oh my gosh, this has become my reality show.
And I think that's a pretty accurate characterization, especially as a first-time home buyer. At least when I was buying my condo, which was my first home purchase, it definitely was pretty intense. It moves quite fast depending on the market you're into. In this case, it was a few weeks. I had to do the due diligence and get all the information about the condo, and I really didn't get all of it until very close to closing. It's not as though I got it on day one, so it makes it a little bit stressful if you're trying to read through all these things and you have your job and you're busy otherwise. But you really want to make sure you take a good look at those rules, at the reserves as much as you can, and ask your attorney or your lender or whoever is managing kind of this part of the deal, or ask the opposing seller as well if they have any information that they might be leaving out that you might want to see. Of course, you don't know what you don't know, so it definitely helps to have an expert on board like an attorney. But even then, things still can get missed, and of course you're not going to get that vibe of being within the condo association that Sarah mentions because, well, you're not in it, and it's hard to kind of describe that to a potential buyer. But do keep in mind, they are selling that condo for some reason, so it helps to take a deeper dive as much as you can.
This has become my reality show, okay? I no longer watch reality shows. I watch the people in my building talk to the HOA board. Meetings basically turn into them just like screaming at each other, like full force screaming.
From my experience in condo management, 20% of your residents give you 80% of your problems. The same would apply to the board. 20% of the owners would give the board 80% of its problems. And in some cases, those residents might be board members themselves. Now, thankfully, the board members that I was dealing with were quite nice and I didn't really have any problems with them, but that doesn't mean that the many hundreds of others didn't have plenty of problems to deal with, because ultimately everyone's gonna have a complaint about something. That is something that the association is going to have to deal with. In this case, they outsource things to management. Many larger associations will do that, in which case now you have another party that's involved with managers.
Since the last time that I talked about this, our manager and assistant manager also left. And so we've had this like rotation of people. So that's like top level what's happened. And then of course, in the middle, it's just, there's been so many things, so many little things, so much chaos. But now we are hopefully moving in a direction that is looking forward. That's why I honestly waited a while to make this, because I wanted to be able to say like, oh, there are steps that are being taken, right? Our hallways still are just like unfinished concrete and drywall. They apparently said that they have a plan. There's a plan, guys.
And that's the thing about condos and HOAs. Ultimately, they are mini governments, and we know how fast government moves.
So yeah, hopefully that satiates your need to get the DL over here. That's what we've kind of been dealing with. But again, I'm glad I didn't make this video 2 months ago, because I might have been screaming towards you guys. But the whole point is maybe we can learn together. And now that we're seeing a little light at the end of the tunnel, I think part 3 is going to be so exciting, because we're gonna have our kitchen done. We're potentially gonna have our custom shelving done, which I'm really excited. And we're just gonna have a home that hopefully we can live in for like 6 more months, and then we're gonna sell it.
So all right, that was a nice down-to-earth video about living in a condo. Didn't get into too many of the weeds because obviously she's still living there, so she can't be calling out specific people or making it too obvious. But in general, condo ownership can be pretty stressful, especially in a larger development like it sounds like she's in, where there's many different people and many different personalities that are clashing together, because in a weird way, when you own all the common areas together, you're like business partners with the rest of your neighbors. And that can get pretty dicey, since not everyone volunteers to be neighbors with whoever they are. My best wishes to Sarah in her new condo adventure. But anyways, if you guys like this video, then definitely like it, since that would help the channel out a lot. And if you want to see more content like this, more reaction videos perhaps, definitely let me know in the comments below for what video you'd like to see me react to next. Otherwise, be sure to subscribe, since I put out new videos every single week and wouldn't want you guys to miss out. But until next time, take care.